Welcome everyone. Here we are, Kirsty Dudson, Purvi Gaur, Ranjini Mazumdar of the Bombay Film Color Network in conversation with Anil Mehta, the cinematographer, well known for several major films since the late 90s, continuing even today. So I will begin with the first couple of questions and then we will move to other questions that others will pose. So, Anil, I know that you started working in the 90s, and obviously, color was the standard by then. But you were a fan. You mentioned Subrata Mitra and Murthy as two very important cinematographers in your history of learning. In your opinion, what was the most significant change for a cinematographer's practice when we moved from black and white to color?
I mean, if you ask the purists and ask those people who worked in black and white, they would say that with the coming of color, everything became simple. Because it was a much more rigorous discipline to create, how should I say, a tonal range within an image, all in black and white. So that's the basis, and that's what we are talking about when we talk cinematography is of how to balance tonalities and how to create textures and how to create a certain depth in the image as a very basic kind of a rule for image making. So with the coming of color, the separations are now not just about lighting and framing. It's also about what colors are being introduced in the frame, and therefore all these things, whatever little preoccupations you have as a cinematographer, follow from there. So this coming of color film was assumed by the black and white practitioners as making life simpler, but it threw up its own set of challenges, which is now how do you deal with this, and particularly in our context where this overload of and the overbearing nature of the color that we use is all around us. How do you kind of give it a semblance of order could be one of the preoccupations. Then how to use it so that you are using it evocatively became the other. These are learnings over the years, of course. And then of course how the medium, which means the film negative, will respond to what you see and how it will translate. So all that. So I mean, without laboring this point, fact is that every transition or every switch involves its own learning, and even the more you grapple with it, the more you learn. So it's like that. The journey of color in the Indian film context is also like that. When it first came, I guess it came, as a kind of head-on blow, and then got assimilated and got used by various practitioners in very purposeful ways.
So, if I was to, like, I was trained as a filmmaker too. In my past, I've been a documentary filmmaker and also trained as a film. And I worked on black and white celluloid in the 80s. So I just wanted to know, my commonsensical response to the transition is that working with a grayscale, light is the most important. But obviously, with color, it's not just light, something else shifts. Can you tell us a little bit about those kinds of changes?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I was saying. So you use light and composition to create the tonal range within black and white, and in color you have the added dimension of color. So now you see how you want to articulate it. Whether you want a foreground which is a bright color and then let it recede, or you want to take the bright colors into the depth to take your eye there, etc., etc. So the color becomes an added layer which you have to deal with. But it's not as if the articulation of light in the cinema frame has gone away. That becomes actually almost slightly, and it's also to do historically. It's also transitioning from, let's say, from direct specular lighting to diffused lighting. Transition happens with black and white to color as well. I mean, it'll require a little more academic, investment in this area for us to say it clearly. But it's like you're saying, from Shubhruto Mitra to Sven Nykvist. Sven Nykvist also worked a lot in black and white, but you look at his work in color, it's all so soft and magical. So that became also a point of reference for us of how the lights can now need not necessarily evoke the studio era, but can now become more atmospheric or naturalistic or drawn from whatever is in the environment.
Just a quick question related to this, and then Kirsty can come in. You've referred to fabric as a very important element in relation to Sanjay Leela Bansali's films, or that's important. What I was talking about, the difference between surface color and color that is generated through light. Uh, Obviously, this meant that production design had to change considerably, and the relationship between design and the cinematographer must have become different with the arrival of color. Could you talk a little bit about that also in relation to your practice, how you work with?
No, actually, what you're saying is absolutely right. Design, decor, apparel, I mean, clothing, and all that, costume, etc., became a very big preoccupation. It is a very big preoccupation with us. Let's just put it without any reference to film. Also, I mean, look at our weddings. Then you don't have to say much more. But it's all about fabric and color and what will go with what, and that's what it's all about. Whereas, I mean, if you want to contrast it, you will see that if there is a wedding in the Western world, it's monochromatic. so, so, so so fabric and costume in the mainstream film playing a very big role in introducing color to our films, yes, it's a very big preoccupation. But then, as the sophistication and articulation of this layer comes into its own, then the production designers have much more to do and say with the, let's say, set design or the coloring of this thing or the how the props will be. And then this is our learning over the, let's say, 90s and 2000s, with the coming of 2000s. And I will talk about maybe Sharmishta's work, because that was my early collaborator, of how she would inform locations, the palette, and, which houses we were shooting in, how they would be dressed, etc., with a very informed sensibility and within the context of the film. So those became conversations. And I don't think in the earlier era that would have been a major conversation. It was a space, it was given, and then you built it, and then you shot in it. And more, and how should I say, with the coming of costume designers who were given the mandate by the directors and producers, how they became influential deciders of what people would wear and therefore how the palette would flow on costume. Again, let's give an example of, let's say, Adi with Dilwale, bringing in people like Manish and people like, including this guy on makeup, bringing in, all these professionals, and at that time also bringing in Sharmishta to do art and all that kind of thing. So he realizes early on that it's all these elements are going to play an important role in how the film looks, and therefore bring in people who can take those calls independently. It's not just the director and the actor deciding what to wear and how and where to shoot it.
Yeah. Dusty?
Yeah, no, that's a really nice segue for one of the questions that I had actually. And you're talking about where these conversations about color happen. I would be so interested to hear you speak about your training at the FTII in Pune. Was color part of the curriculum? Were there conversations about color, or was it very much taken for granted at that point?
No, actually, see, that's the advantage of being in film school, that all these conversations are being had almost on a daily basis, whether formally or informally. So I can't say that color was listed as a subject. It must have been, and I guess it was. But the fact is that it was top of mind for a lot of people, and they were guys. I mean, guys, I'm calling Kumar Shani a guy. Kumar's films were coming out at that time. I mean, his articulation. of color within his films is very, very, how should I say it, very pointed and very thought through and very self conscious. So if you look at Maya Darpan and all, it's not just about what someone is wearing, it's about how color is flowing through the film. So these are definitely part of our learnings and our years at the school. I mean, including I can think of Mani's film, which was called Mati Manas. I think it's a documentary. It's almost
Yes.
a documentary film. I mean, none of Mani's films are strictly classifiable. So, so I was thinking, yeah, it was. So in that, there was I remember the cinematographer again, somebody from around our batches had shot it, Venu. And he had kind of bounced light off earth tone fabric or paper or something to, give a tonality to the light that would fall on the on the space, and including there were actors in that film if I remember right. So there's all that is part of our growing years in a sense, but how it plays out eventually in your professional life is I mean, you can't quantify it. It's kind of assimilated and then it plays out.
Thank you. And you've spoken a little bit about color as something that's a conversation between you and costume designer, director, makeup artists. One thing that we in this group are very interested in is the role of the laboratory. So we'd be really interested to hear you kind of just speak a little bit about your relationship with the laboratory, your relationship with color graders, both across kind of analog and digital work. How's that relationship changed? What did it used to look like? Is that different now since the digital intermediate? I know that's a big question, but we'd really love to hear your reflections on the laboratory.
It's yeah, it is a big question, but actually the answers are the thing is that almost all Indian cinematographers will kind of have this issue with our labs. I'm not, it's very easy to say, oh, our labs had a lot of problems. But there are reasons for that. Basis is economics always, So and I think Ujjwal has spoken about it, whereas, Kodak has introduced a certain process, a chemical process, a kind of machine, a kind of, temperatures to be maintained, etc., etc. All the tech specs are there. Now, back in India, for us to wholesale import that technology and put up that plant is not viable. So, we will find our homegrown solutions and try and improvise with them and try and do what we call jugaad and end up with a kind of peculiar mix which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So, we have had to live through those really, I mean, it's vexing to think about what the hours that we have spent in our labs trying to get the basics right. And so, as growing cinematographers dealing with color film in our laboratories, we would always look at the work that came from the West and say, what's going on here? Why aren't we able to, you know, reproduce the same things? Because at the end of the day, we're using the same stock. So, that thing, in a sense, blame lay at the feet of the lab people. But they were coping, like I said, they were coping with the Indian conditions, the very hot weather, the dust, and dust was a very, very big preoccupation with us because it creeps into our minds, literally, because it's just everywhere, and nobody in the West can understand that. So it was a negative has come out, the first wash has come out, and you realize that your negative is dusty. So, so yeah.
That's what would cause the scratches.
Yeah, and then that would go on. Then the environment is dusty, so your prints get scratched as soon as they are screened. So, and then we are not the most hygienic, or how should I say it, clinically minded people. So we go with the flow. And that's how our films and our film prints would end up. So it was not an easy phase for us to come to terms with it. I remember trying to get dupe negatives made for printing, and we used to print off original negative, which was not the international practice. Again, for cost saving, and then processing the dupe negative was an expensive process. Plus, getting the dupe stock in, etc. I mean, those days tariffs were also very high, so it was not. It was nothing was easy at that point.
And
So
whether,
let's say,
oops, sorry, please
no,
go
no,
on.
please, Kirsty,
I
please.
just wanted to know if there were specific labs that you had relationships with, or was it depended on which project you were working on, or did you kind of have a consistent relationship with specific laboratories?
No, absolutely. So one tries to build that relationship with a lab and a colorist, particularly, because I keep saying the men are more important and the people who are working on the machines are more important than the machines most of the time. So you try and build that relationship, but there would be that odd case where the producer has a business relationship with another, with another facility, and then you have to weigh those options as well. So I've worked in various labs in Bombay, but the mainstay was Ad Labs, which was a newly formed and with a bunch of very enterprising people. Mr. Manmohan Shetty was like at the front of it. And I was coming into Bombay and starting work in advertising, and he had set up a small lab to cater to advertising films. And that was like that little niche where we went in and we were able to build this rapport with lab technicians and go into the rooms and see what was going on. And there again, like I said, there was a lot of homegrown solutions to what was the stipulated standard. But AdLabs was really supportive in more than just being a lab. Mr. Shetty was responsible later for producing films. There was a whole movement where parallel cinema, new wave, all that. Post new wave in France, there was this whole bunch of young filmmakers who were supported by that laboratory in the NFDC sponsored film era. So there was a very symbiotic relationship with that lab, which of course grew for us as the next generation in. We kind of nurtured it. I mean, they nurtured us, and we went along with that flow till Ad Labs became a very, very big facility. And there I remember once that, yeah, this was doing dupe negatives because the print order for Lagan was very large. So I said, okay, a single negative, original camera negative is not going to play out in the same way. So you should have dupes for this. Of course, dupes had been made before in our context. And then getting that dupe negative, getting prints from the dupe negative to match your original negative, all that was a learning curve. I'm putting it politely.
And that was
So in
done
terms
through.
of sorry, go ahead, Kirsty.
And were those release prints produced by Ad Labs?
Yes. Sorry. In the case of Lagan, it was mixed. We went to a lab in Hyderabad, which belongs to Ramoji Rao. I'm trying to think of the name of the lab. He had given a separate name. But the Ramoji Rao facility in Hyderabad did the initial processing and printing of Lagan. And then the dupe negative had to be made in Ad Labs. Again, because I was not happy with the dupe and the schedules were running really tight. I was not happy with the quality of the dupe that we got out of this lab. So all that.
And you are sorry, no, go Ranjani, please.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Kirsty.
No,
Yeah,
please,
yeah.
please, Ranjani.
No, but I just wanted to know in terms of your time, how much time do you think you spent on the sets shooting and then in the lab? In terms of your overall work, how much time do you think actually went in to the
I would
lab?
say that it's a film to film thing. It's not like there's one rule for this. And like because Lagan came at the top of my head, it was a very long drawn process to get that film right. So I spent weeks meaning it was more than a month. I spent living in Hyderabad just to strike the right prints and to keep them consistent in Hyderabad. And let's say for some other film which came a little later, it would have been, not even living there and all that kind of thing, just popping in and out, and over 2 weeks you can get a film out. So there's no norm to it, but the fact is that in my practice, I have tried to stay invested in that process as intensely as I am at the shoot stage, because there's no point in letting that delivery slip away from you. So whether it is coloring in a digital laboratory or in the optical laboratories, your investment of time and mind space should be the same. And for me, I make that time.
Maybe I can ask just a follow-up question before handing over to Purvi. I would be so interested to hear you speak a little bit about what that looks like now with digital. And I've heard you speak previously about your use of the digital intermediate, but how is that relationship with the lab different now when films are born digital, shot digitally, graded digitally, as opposed to, as you say, having to work with the photomechanical and the optical labs to kind of create standardization? How is that relationship with the lab different now in a kind of digital production?
I feel essentially, because it shouldn't change, and it doesn't. I mean, for me, it has not. So, and I'm not talking about the tech, but I'm talking about your process, as just as a thought process. So here's the thing with digital is that today I know a lot of, at least maybe younger cinematographers, maybe I don't know, even older cinematographers will go in and have LUTs designed for the film, which is the lookups or the lookup tables or the looks designed for the film. Then they're kind of ingested into the original file when you're shooting, and those get sent down to the digital lab, and they are the first layer of correction onto how the film will eventually look. So what I'm trying to say is that there is some pre-decision on how this film will look by the cinematographer when he has sat and built those LUTs and ingested them. My process has not changed from the earlier days, is that yes, you shoot with a thought for what the film should look like, and therefore you invest when you're on location as well on making that emphasis or that accent work. But you do give yourself space to come back and look at that work afresh after it's edited. So I prefer it like that. In the sense, I give myself that, okay, now it's all short. Of course, there was a perspective in mind. Now I go in and I'm happy to reinterpret it, you know, because it can, I mean, it's not just about that, okay, now I have a fresh perspective. No, not necessarily. It's probably just the same perspective, and then you try and make it work. But sometimes certain things would have changed during the shoot. So then, how do you deal with that, and how do you then so I enjoy that little breathing space, and then going back and interpreting what has been shot or what has been put together, and then giving it its own little curve. So sometimes certain sequences might change tonally from what you had earlier thought or how you shot them.
Can you think of an example from your work where something has changed from the shooting to then how you want it to be graded? Or
Yeah, suppose I'm giving you, it's not specifically from my film, but let's say in the edit something has become like intercut with some other sequence. So you want to kind of separate it from this one. So you might pick a tonality for this one and then say, because it's now intercutting, you want this one to have a slightly other layer. I'm giving you just a very obvious example to do that, yeah. So those things that decisions would come from there. And sometimes you look at that whole sequence edited and you say, okay, now the tonalities in this sequence might lend itself to a colder treatment or a slightly more desaturated treatment. Then you would take it there. And the way I don't know, it's a little premature for me to say this, but what happens is that I find that it's simpler for the Western films to apply a LUT to a movie, because I'm calling it their films, is the films have a certain kind of narrative which is more even and more within a certain band, right? And our films are all kinds of things. They are like a whole mix of lots of items, let's say, for lack of a better word. Yeah, which kind of come together in a mainstream film. Again, obvious example, song, you know, which is just not part of the structure of any Western film. If it's a song, then it's a musical. That's got its own little bandwidth, right? And our bandwidths are like this in our movies. So to hold that whole ensemble thing together also needs a little bit of a processing.
So specific, it makes the color grading more complicated. That shift in the tone of the film between song number, kind of emotional climax, that in kind of Western classical cinema is a lot more kind of consistent.
Yeah, correct. So let's just say, again, crude example. Let's say we are going from an emotional love song to a slightly sad breakup scene to a very high, high octane dance number. These are all part of the same film. So when you're coloring it or when you're thinking through its tonalities, you have to pitch it differently. And yet it has to hang together. So if you think it's a more difficult task, then we are doing it.
I think Purvi has a question
Yeah,
that
I
is
was
really
gonna
quite
say,
well
Purvi,
written.
please.
Yeah. As you were talking, Anil, about adapting to the different moods, I was thinking about Highway, where it's not just the moods that constantly change, it's also the landscapes. I believe you've shot from Delhi all the way till Kashmir. So, how does the lighting setup sort of adapt to all of that? And yet, as you say, it all hangs in together as one film, and the audience doesn't even know what's happening. So, I mean, how does that play out in practice?
So Highway is actually a journey film, right? It's
Yeah.
more like a journey that this girl took. If you ride with that girl's journey, then you'll take anything. You won't notice all these jumps. There was no lighting in that film. I,
Oh, it
I
was
mean,
all
how
natural.
how could it be?
Yeah.
You were arriving somewhere, shooting and moving on and shooting. So I knew at the beginning of the film that I'm not moving with light trucks behind me. And I told the producers that that's an encumbrance on this one. So yeah, there will be some requirements for lights because there are few night scenes, interspersed in the movie. But otherwise, it's like you're on the road every second, third day, and you're in a location which you may not even have seen yet because we were not able to scout that film fully.
Okay.
We did go to Delhi, we went to Haryana, we saw, but then, what's it called? Not Leh, Laul Spiti was snowbound. So we couldn't travel further, and also we had to come back, prep, and then set out for the shoot. It was all a very compressed time frame for that one. So we literally found the film on the road, on the move. So there again, illustrating what I was saying is that then you come home and you, in the grading suite or in the coloring suite, you say, okay, now how do I give this film a tonality which will work for it?
Yeah.
And now I'm making it sound like it's not so mysterious because the same sensibility has informed the shoot, right? So you come home and you deal with your this thing. It's like भाजी लेके घर आया अभी पकाना है तो दूधी आई है तो दूधी पकाएंगे ना.
So come home and do this was possible only with the digital. You couldn't have done that with celluloid.
Not really. I mean, not really. You're right in a way. So for example, going back to Lagan, the palette, that's one film in which the palette was discussed because it was written into the text of the film. There is no, there has no been no rain. There is famine. There is, nothing, no standing crops. That's written, that's the basis of the movie. So now you're looking for a landscape that will lend itself to this story. Then you're looking to take out all the colors which can suggest vegetation or that kind of thing. So you've already got a palette written into the text, and now you have to find it. So we did go very far to find it. Then we found those locations. Then we informed those locations with all these elements. And then in the shooting of the film also, I tried to keep it as naturalistic as possible, and also then in the coloring of the film I was also using, because like you said, in celluloid these decisions had to be made while you were filming. I was using coloring filters which were all in that realm, which were to warm to brown kind of realm. So whatever filters were available at that time to help this cause, I was using them. So but there is one joyous song, let's say Radha, when they're celebrating Janmashtami or whatever it is. So there, then one will go a little extra and make it not just yellow and brown, but make it golden. So that little shift in tonality and make the light more diffused and make the filtration also on the camera a little more softer. So for that particular number, because that's what it's trying to evoke. And then come home and sit in the lab for 3 weeks to try and make it all act together. More than 3 weeks, I think. And I remember being ill at the end of that grading session.
Purvi?
Yeah, thank you, Anil. Another thing I was curious about was working with different directors, Anil. You worked with people as varied as Sanjay Leela Bansali, then Imtiaz Ali, and then Karan Johar, whose cinematic worlds are very different from each other. So how do you and how do you reorient your own personal praxis in relation to those visions? How does that, I mean, work out?
That goes with the territory, now, when you choose to be a cinematographer.
Yeah, but as you said,
Enter,
you try to keep things natural. That's I
both
feel like
things
that's
happen.
your
Purvi, both things will happen. It's your personality will inform your work, but you have chosen a field of work where you have to make a certain piece, which means a written piece and a director's vision translate correctly. Both things apply. They're contradictory, but that's how it works. So you enter a film trying to understand what that film is trying to do and the space it's trying to inhabit, and therefore inform it from within that zone.
right.
You're talking about Sanjay, Karan, and Imtiaz. They, in my view, are coming from similar spaces. The guys who are coming from different spaces are probably Sriram Raghavan, But Badlapur is different from, let's say,
Yeah.
a Karan Johar film or like a Kank.
Now, elaborate a
Kank and
little more.
Badlapur are two very, very different things. But
Yeah, could you elaborate a little more on the small budget Sri Ram Raghavan Badlapur versus the big budget spectacular films of Sanjay Leela Bansali, Karan Johar and all? Can you say something about what changes in your practice?
the
And
budget,
how do they think about color differently?
the money changes. That's it.
I'm sure color also
The
changes.
money, color of money changes. It's. I mean, these are slightly obvious things that will happen. Because same thing, like in Highway in Badlapur also, I said, okay, this film, I'm not going in with any gear. I called up the gaffer, who is one of our senior most gaffers, Mulchand, and told him, okay, on this film, I don't even want a truck of light, I want a van of lights, which means I want a couple of tube lights and some small fixtures in a van, in a, chota van. So he heard me out and then he said, okay, I hear you out. And then he went to the producer to give him his estimates for what it would be for the film. And he said, see, right now Anil has told me that he's going to work like this, but I know later he will ask for this, that, and the other. So I'm giving you a budget for a mainstream film. But that's not how it played. Again, Badlapur was done 80% available light, very minimal lighting, that kind of thing. And again, choice of locations, in my view, creates the palette for the film. So if he has relocated out of the city where he was leading a happy life with his wife and young kid who died in a car accident, when he relocates himself, he lives in a that space has to have a lot of character to identify or to say that, this is his big loss. So to find that location also was like a big process. So we get associated, cinematographers get associated with, oh, how luscious it looked or how colorful it looked. But it was also this part of the work that, you went and found a location which spoke the language of the character and then kind of did the scenes within it which were appropriate for that film. Those things are the less obvious things of a cinematographer's work.
Urvi, you want to go ahead?
But this thing of what Kirsty was talking about, the transition from film lab to the digital lab, in terms of the process of coloring, while I was saying that the sensibility is the same and the process is almost the same, fact is that the tech shift has been so massive that yes, the work, the nature of the, because I'm saying Kirsty's work is about, how this technology has moved and how emulsions were made, etc. Is that the shift is massive. And yet, so I try and stay grounded by, let's say, a few assumptions that we make, that even when digital did come in, the whole process of finding that what the digital image that works for cinema was an approximation of what looks like film. All digital technology was trying to arrive there, and then when the Alexa first came out and they had managed their image processing like that, is when we said, okay, now we can shoot with these cameras. Before that, Sony had tried with their HD whole thing to try and make all production digital. Then Red came as an upstart company and tried to, disrupt a lot of things, which they did. Uh, so I would say, therefore, if the sensibility is the same, then your job has not changed that much. Now you're just using a slightly different medium to approximate the same things. So my conversation with the colorist is similar. It's just that his hands and feet are working, or his hands and mind is working differently.
I wonder if I can jump in with a question just on the back of that comment. I'm just thinking about, and this is a film I know by its English name, which was Never Say Goodbye from 2006, Kank.
Kabhi alvida
Kabhi
na
alvida
kehna.
na kehna.
Thank you. That has, which I've heard you speak about before, that it's kind of one of, I think, your first use of the digital intermediate and kind of testing out different kind of ways of working with digital color. There's a dance sequence in that film for it's a party that's a 60s themed party that has this very saturated poppy color. So I was just interested, you saying, the minute the digital arrived, we were instantly trying to replicate the look of film. I was just really struck with that dance number, and I would love to hear you reflect on the color if you remember decisions around that, because it's so bright, it's so poppy, and it's supposed to be a 60s party. And obviously, because Ranjani works on color of the 60s, we would just be really interested to hear you maybe speak about what are you thinking when you think 60s color when you create a dance sequence like that, particularly with this new digital technology?
So, yeah, so actually, see, with digital, for me personally, digital came with Highway. I used, and there was a reason for that, because this film was so much on the move, and we were not going to be able to, just the logistics of film stock and all that kind of handling was going to be I could foresee that this is going to be a problem. You're shooting in remote parts, you're not going to be able to, send back your exposed on time, and then you're traveling with it through all kinds of temperatures and all that kind of thing. So just that was one consideration. Secondly, we were going to be on the road, the camera was going to be mounted on vehicles. It was not going to be possible to shoot with, stop and start with changing magazines. Also, I thought this would be more, let's say, free flow for the actors also, to, let them carry on and improvise, and because everyone was going to find their feet on this one, right? And luckily, at that point, Sony had introduced the F65, which I still feel was the most filmic camera, digital camera ever made. But for its own reasons, it was taken off, and then more economical models were introduced later. So Highway is actually shot digital F65, and that's the most naturalistic, like I said, lighting wise, etc., and treatment wise also for me. But it is digital. So now going digital for this purpose of what I've just tried to explain very, briefly, well, also the time had come, in the sense that the film infrastructure around us was dying. Labs were shutting down by then, and yet it is not that electronic hyper kind of a treatment for this film. So with digital, you can still deliver that same very filmic looking film. Um, then comes, let's say, Kank, and there I could see that the treatment of the film is slightly hyper. I mean, I'm using the word badly. I mean, I'm using a crass kind of word, but that's the treatment in the film, and that's coming from Karan. because he likes to stage his dramas like that. Yeah, and he's very particular and well, almost obsessed with the kind of clothes that his actors wear. So he informs that process in a very big way. So whether it is, I mean, any scene, the clothing are a very definitive statement. And so for this party, I'm sure he must have driven a lot of people mad with trying to bring those costumes in and bringing all that color in. When you see that, your response has to be, okay, how to make this work. So if the poppy colors have come into the frame for this song sequence, then if you're invested in that, in the treatment of the film, in the spirit in which it was written or being staged, then you would go into the lab thinking, okay, now how do I heighten this experience? Which is probably what happened with Kank. And I think somewhere I said earlier that with Kank, now when I look back, I feel I went overboard. I really went overboard because I was able to do a lot with the digital tech, which I didn't do with Highway, to do, color separation, enhancing of particular tonalities, and all that, all pulled all the bells and whistles out of that box, electronic box, and started turning them. So that's Kank. But they, like I said, totally contrasted films, contrasted treatment, and I mean, it's good to have technology which can service all this.
In that connection, I wanted to ask you a question. I don't know if you've seen David Fincher's Seven.
Seven, I would
The
have
serial
seen
killer
very
film,
long ago.
where Kevin Spacey is the serial killer.
Very,
Seven.
very long ago, I've seen this film.
Okay, so it was shot by Darius Khondji, and what is exactly the process called, Kirsty?
A bleach bypass process.
Yeah, so they remove the silver from emulsion to create a particular effect. Have we ever done anything like that in India, or with actually change the emulsion
Chemistry, or to fiddle with the chemistry, let's say in our labs. So here's the thing, we struggle to get the chemistry right to get a faithful image for the longest time, for decades. Why would we want to fiddle with it? Firstly, we didn't get the straight line. Now, why do you want to do? So, which is why I say that in that era, where the lab, when we would read about what Darius Khondji did with Evita and what he did, it's a big problem because you're risking your life if you say that to your lab. And I'm talking about the days of the chemical optical process. But here's the thing, there were cinematographers who went that distance and did do it. I mean, my contemporaries also. But I was not taking that chance because I was very worried about getting the line straight first. And here's the thing, what you're talking about, and specifically bleach bypass, when I was grading Rockstar, there's a certain part, a certain chapter in that story where the character's life degenerates in a big way. And I said, and at that time I was working on Baselight, and Baselight also had put in buttons in their system which would simulate film looks. Bleach bypass was one such button. So I told the colorist, press it. Because now it's a press of a button, right? It's not one photochemical process with lots of dyes coming here and there and silver, whether it is being retained or being washed off and all that. So here when he pressed that button, I said, works. Then we tweaked it a bit. And in Rockstar, there is bleach bypass.
Okay.
So again, I mean, the film has to ask for it. If I did bleach bypass for Karan's films, he would have asked me to leave the room long ago.
No, I was asking also this question, and Purvi, I'll come back to you. Was also asking this question because people talk about film aesthetics as if it has very little relationship to technology. It's something else that's going on and unraveling on screen, and there's a focus primarily on story, plot, actors, stars. I just wanted to know, in your own opinion, this, because I do feel this, and I think all of us feel this, the relationship between infrastructure, including what you're saying goes on in the labs and jugaad and everything, infrastructure, and constantly changing technology and aesthetics. Can we divorce this? This is totally related in some ways.
Uh, Actually, no, just say it again, Ranjini.
That when we talk about the director's vision, most of the time people are obsessive about the director's vision. Nowadays they do talk to cinematographers, but it's all about how you implement the director's vision. But there is this other space of the lab, the studio, crumbling infrastructure at one level, all of which actually shapes the look of a film. And yet that is the whole history of cinema has been written without taking that into account.
That you're absolutely right about that. Thinking of it from ground up, there's very little thinking and writing and investigating, which I guess you guys are doing. So that's very good and very valid. The fact is that in our films, again, what happens is that the story, the actor, the text, the dialogue are what drives it. So now, if sadly, now that's the reality. I mean, that's what works in our film. So if you're quarreling with that, then don't do mainstream because that's the nature of the beast. And then how now the flip side of that, now I'm saying that in today's day, we are fortunate that a lot of producers and directors have come to appreciate the value of this work, of the production designers, of the editors, of the cinematographers. So we, in some ways, I have been fortunate to be working in that phase where the directors and producers were giving it that space and that whatever that regard that okay, these resources are going to help the process of making the film, which is why I'm talking about people like, and a lot of production designers today are bringing a lot of value to the films that we are making. And similarly, cinematographers also came of age. But I mean, it's also kind of cyclical, right? I mean, we went through an 80s which was disastrous in mainstream Indian film, I mean, Hindi film. I don't want to talk about what I don't know, but there was a very lean phase in the way we were producing. So then there was the 50s and 60s where great stuff was happening, whether it was in black and white or whether it was the directors, whether it was the stories they were telling. There was a great phase at that time. So I'm saying these things will come and go. And similarly with digital, I feel that honeymoon phase with digital is now cresting because the way what are they called? Digital networks are behaving is like, they encouraged a very steep curve of upping the game. And now it's like scuttling it. I can sense it in the market. They're scuttling it. So having created a cadre and created an opportunity, now they're having every single person who's producing for OTTs is complaining about budget cuts, time, this, that, having to, produce under so much pressure. It's unnerving what's happening. And that's going to tell on the way we tell our stories. I mean, those stories that will probably follow from here. But this is, I mean, stuff for more investigation and stuff that you guys have to do.
If I could chime in, speaking of unnerving, Anil, what are your thoughts on using virtual productions now? And AI has been coming into cinematography. So should we be concerned?
As I mean, we should be as concerned as we were with every shifting this thing. No, it's with every shifting. How should I say? There are quantum shifts in tech that happen over time, right?
Yeah.
When the motor car came, that way, so like that. Right now, the thing is that everybody is using the term AI without fully understanding its implications, and the implications are going to play out over some time. Now, if we ab- abrogate, I mean, how, no, if we abdicate our responsibility as the people who are going to make the decision, then so be it. Then you're giving away your purpose in life to someone, some machine to do it, right? Then you're doomed. But if you don't abdicate that responsibility and use the tech to say what you want to say and how you want to say it, then it can be useful. So, so we are seeing that, and the only thing that I say about, artificial is fine, intelligence is very scary. So, and if you let that intelligence run away and become one, runaway, whatever, demon, then it is going to consume us. In small ways, it's already doing it, right? With your what is being fed onto your Insta page, it's already being done. Now, how you let it grow and let it affect your largest cultural spaces is completely our own responsibility. And I feel that when it becomes scary and overriding, will be the time when we ourselves will dial back and say, "Ke bhai, ho gaya, bahut ho gaya."
You think that's going to happen?
We should, but you have to be conscious and aware of it, right? So it's your generation that's going to draw that line. So Purvi, don't think about films division and family planning. Think about the impending doom.
Future.
Duly noted.
So say it as future, yeah.
Yeah. You had a question on the drone.
Yes. I was also interested in asking, have you incorporated drones in your work and what is it like? Just genuinely curious to know what is it like working with them?
So same thing, like I was saying, when the red cameras came and I first tested the red one, I was very clear. One simple test I did and I said, no, I'm not using it. I waited till the F65 came and I said, yeah, okay, I'm happy to start using it. When the Alexa image came, I said, yeah, fine, it's looking like a cinematic image. We should use it in our films. And look at it this way. What did Ari call their image? Ari log C. What is log? Log is derived from the chemistry, photochemistry of the film image. The log curve, the D log curve, is from film. Whereas what is digital? Linear. Linear means just quantities. And this is an interpretation of how an image should look. So when Ari did log C curve and applied it to the data, it looked right. So now with the drones, of course, now this is part of the digital, it's a subset of the digital realm. Drones also came in with micro cameras. And those were really not usable they were okay for weddings, but they were not good for cinema purpose. And for cinema purpose, what was being used were octocopters, where we mounted a small form camera and then with our lenses and all that. I found that very cumbersome. And I also, for the kind of narratives that at least I was involved with, I found very little use for something like that. So I would discourage people from using it. Firstly, it's an encumbrance. Then I don't know what that shot is doing from when the story is happening here. So I didn't find much use for it. But strangely and ironically, I am in Croatia filming for something which is a mainstream film with lots of song and dance. And I'm calling for the drone every day. I found, because it's about the landscape, I was so taken by this where I am. So when the director said, I want to use a drone, I said, yeah, let's get it. So every scene, if we can, if she's just walking on the marina or walking on the pier, and then you can lift off and just show the bay and those islands in the distance, and there's so much atmospheric clarity, then it's lovely for this particular film. So again, there's no one thing to say, okay, drone, good or bad, drone, yes or no. It's how it plays out. And here's the thing with drones, that today we have DJI 3, the Inspire 3, where the image quality has improved a lot. They've also been on the learning curve. So when I'm looking at the drone image today, I'm feeling reassured. Earlier, I was not like that, feeling like that about the image. And the last thing is about the operators. It's a complicated machine it's a skill, that you have to operate with joysticks. And this team that we found in Croatia is very good at it. So why not? So it's not a simple answer about drone, yes or no. It's about, and it's like I said, it's a happy coincidence that we are speaking about it today, because As of last week, I was telling the director that these drone guys are good, so we can use them. But tomorrow again, we are going out in the middle of the sea to film something. Drone leke out, drone leke out. Choreographer is going on.
But I wanted to ask you this question, two questions related to what you just said. It seems that, when color stock arrived, we had different formats, Agfa color, Orvo color, Eastman color, Technicolor, and there were these format wars that were going on at that time. In a sense, it was a competitive atmosphere with these different stocks. But it seems that with the digital, the competition is between these different cameras and what they are able to do for you. It's not really. Can you just reflect on this a little?
It's the
Because
same thing, Ranjani. It's about how let's say Sony camera system will produce the image for the final image for you in a certain way with a certain color science and a certain processing of their data, and Ari will do it slightly differently and Red will do it slightly differently. For me, it's the same thing, negative. So the raw file is your negative, right? So it's the manufacturer like Kodak and then Fuji and then Orvo. They will have their own little characteristics, and you test the stock or the negative for its characteristics, and then decide how you want to use it. Again, in our context, all of this was largely driven by economics. Kodak was expensive, Geva was cheap, all that. So and Fuji, of course, Fuji was competitive with Kodak, and I think the price differential was not that much. And their cinematographers would take the pick of saying, okay, I want to work with Fujifilm or I want to work with Kodak, because they had slightly different image characteristics. But in my working years, Kodak has been the mainstay negative stock. After that is when the game changes. Is when the producer comes in and says, okay, this film is going to strike 300 prints and I can't afford Kodak print stock, is when the game changes. So most of our films were released on Geva color. Geva print stock.
Okay.
This is in the 1990s.
It is. That's, I think, 80s and 90s.
This is very interesting. So Purvi and I have done a lot of research on the use of Jiva color in the 50s, but we didn't know it was being used for release prints in the 90s.
Wow. It goes on well into till whenever film was around. Print stock was always. And here's the thing. Then we were told, okay, for the A centers, which means the A cities like Delhi release or something, okay, 50 prints or maybe 100 prints will go on Kodak, and then the rest will go on B center, C center prints.
Oh, right.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are cheaper, much cheaper. And here's the thing, Orvo, I think, was okay, Indu. Indu is a company that was set up as a native company, but it imported stock in bulk and cut it and perforated it and sold it in this country. Indu stock was also used. But Indu imported from Orvo. I think Orvo is East Europe and so is Giva actually. So these are very hardcore economic decisions, and no cinematographer was happy with this. We would refuse to look at our Geva prints.
What was different between a Kodak print and a Geva print?
You would lose a lot of information, lose a lot of tonal delicacy. All that would go. So basically, if you think bandwidth wise, which is a easily understandable term, or latitude wise, the latitude would shrink, both color depth and tonal values. So if you had tonal values which are stretching from 1 to 10, it would get reduced to 7, and in the case of Geva to 4, 5. And then you don't want to look at it. I'm putting it very simplistically, but this is a lab technician will explain this better. But this is essentially.
Colors would also change.
Yeah, there would be a color shift. So these stocks had certain characteristics, and like I explained, most of those decisions were economic. But in the Western world, all this will be read slightly differently, because you could use good Geva color in the East European films has worked well. or in the Russians had their own, stocks, which had a very distinct look. But those worked well in that era for them. We didn't manufacture anything. That was our problem. We always imported.
So Geva clearly had this continuous relationship with India for a long time.
For a long time. I mean, I can't put a year on it of when it started coming in. There will be lab technicians who can tell us that.
But I'm interested, but the camera negative was typically Kodak.
For an A film, it would be Kodak,
Yeah.
and Fuji, like I said, some photographers started opting for Fuji film.
And was there a reason for that in terms of tonality or feel?
Yeah. Fuji film had I'll put it very, very broadly. Kodak film had a slightly warmer tonality, and Fuji had a slight cyan bias without doing any fiddling at a very base level. And Fujifilm also had a certain, so let's say, slightly colder look than Kodak, but also, I mean, the tonal ranges were kind of equal.
So I wanted to ask you a question, Anil, about skin color and skin tone in a country like India, where skin is such a skin tone and skin color is such a big issue and theme. And in the 60s, when I was going through all these magazines and all, a lot of actresses have expressed their anxiety about moving from black and white to color because then the skin tone became very important, and they realized that, and makeup had not developed enough to handle that. Can you tell us a little bit about what, uh, in your practice, as well as what you know from an earlier era, how significant was this issue around skin?
No, it is. It's a very important. It's a very important consideration for cinematographers as well. I mean, I would imagine globally, but it does become more complicated in a country like India. I'll talk only in our context. Is that because, okay, let's just very simply say brown. Brown is a mix of colors, right? So, which pigment, how much of, and a brown, Purvi's brown is right now looking different from Ranjani's looking, I don't know why I'm looking pink. But anyway, that's another matter. So, here's the thing: to get this articulation, like right now on Purvi's face, I can see the green bias because of the lighting, not because of because you've been eating too many whatever.
And I think I've got too much light.
No, it's not the quantity now. It's the coloring. And to get the coloring of the varied browns right is not an easy process. So a lot of times it's easy to say that, oh, Kodak was made for the Western world, and when it came to India, it didn't translate as well. No, it was a very delicate thing that with the layers of the red, green, blue, how to get the brown right. It's easier to get a Kirsty skin tone right with the same stock. I'm talking now in a very narrow domain of, how coloring of film and all that, or the way I see it, let's say. I don't know other cinematographers.
No, in that.
So what happened is that therefore now, even as young practitioners, we said, okay, in the West, how do the Western films look so great, and why do our films look all a little confused? Is that to get our skin tones right is a process. To get our lights to be at faithful color temperatures, then the coming of daylight balanced lights, which were HMIs, they were not continuous spectrums, they had certain spikes, sometimes a green spike, then how to correct it with the magenta filter. It was a long process of getting the skin tone right, and skin tone is a preoccupation for actor driven films, actor driven dramas. So yes, so we as cinematographers in this country have had to deal with that, and sometimes we would easily just transfer the blame, saying, "Okay, oh, Kodak is built for the West, and they didn't get India right." I don't think it's as simple as that.
Kirsty wanted to ask you a question about.
And then there's the Tamilian film. there's a Tamilian film, and then there's this fair girl from Delhi. All those things are also part of our spectrum, right?
I think that was something that really struck me watching Lagan was the range of skin tones in that film from like very very fair to very dark, and also how those play out differently with the predominance of whiteness in that film as a costuming color. Because obviously you've got the kind of the cricket whites, but also a lot of the villagers are in white. And I'd love to hear you speak a bit about managing the color white as well as kind of racialized whiteness, whether in that film or I think Ranjani, you had some thoughts on whiteness and snow as well. Because I've heard other cinematographers say it's a very difficult color to handle.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, Kirsty. One is that it sets the parameter of white is that, is that objective tonality against which you will see all other tonalities, right? It's like the mid gray or the white will become your. But in the specific context of Lagan, the fact is that I knew from the beginning that we were going to go with this muted palette because of the nature of the story. Then, secondly, the villagers' natural color is that white dhoti and white this thing. Uh, so we actually, at some stage of prep, although we had all gone with this flow, at a certain stage of the shoot, early shoot, we kind of started, and I started going up to, what's his name, to Ashutosh and saying, okay, is this film going to look very bleak? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a mainstream film. The most amount of conversations around color and palette were held about on that film because everyone was aware and also that the story required it and needed it. There was no way I was going to say that, the guys can play cricket in blue clothes. You cannot. No.
They do now, but
Yeah, so you have to deal with it, right? But we started getting anxious about how everything was looking very bleak and almost monochromatic early on in the shoot. So there we then thought of, okay, what if the village women, and typically in North India and particularly Western India also, women carry a lot of color regardless. In the bleak landscape of Rajasthan, women wear color, with a lot of flair. So we took from that and said, okay, at least the women who are seen, at least in the background, can wear some color and bring that into the frame, which started happening by and by. And then we took certain liberties. Like I said, on the Janmashtami day, everybody brought out their colorful clothes, which even Bhuvan had to order one kurta from Bombay, which he had not planned. So like that, we introduced some amount of color. Then, because we were in an open landscape and the light was literally all around us, it's a very hot country. So I didn't fret about the white that much. But in the coloring of the film, I did introduce a tonality, a slightly warm tonality, which again I said was calibrated differently for different scenes, but a certain warm tonality to take the edge of just stark whiteness. So all the Indian villagers' clothes were dipped in some kind of slight, like what we call a tea dip, or rolled around in the mud and then washed again, so that they became like unbleached clothing. So some of that was also done.
And what about snow? Have you shot in the snow?
For Rockstar, we were in some kind of snowscapes. Yeah, but I don't know. And now, particularly with digital, I don't fret that much. Because it's possible to bring back information where you feel that it's gone too bright. It's possible with the tools in the digital boxes to tweak that. So, like what to a layperson would be like in a Photoshop, you have so many little things that you can pick to doctor the image. Having said that, now the flip side of that coin is that you have to still articulate that image in a manner that it still looks real. It's not doesn't look doctored, but you have to do the doctoring little delicately. So there will be occasions when I'll tell the colorist there's too much color in the sky. So you take it back because naturalistically it would not play out like this on film, which being the benchmark. It's very easy to make anything. We can make blue red today.
So you're shooting in Croatia right now, and you've done a lot of shooting in the US and Europe, and of course all over India. So what is very distinct about how does the change in climate affect uh, your decisions? Because you're dealing with heat all the time here.
Well, it's very hot in Croatia today. I mean, 2 weeks ago it wasn't like that, but it's getting really warm. And the sun is very harsh, which I was not expecting. So now I have to deal with it, and I was telling the director and production also yesterday that these middle hours of the day are just impossible. So I don't know how we're going to deal with it. Fact is that we'll still be filming all through the day. But yeah, but what amazes me about the West is that the clarity of the atmosphere is which somehow we miss in our own environment. This is not to do with film or anything. It's to do with I don't know what's going on with us. Why is there so much dust in our environment? So that dust and haze. So here I enjoy looking at the landscape because all the way to the horizon there's so much clarity. And the same thing happens in the UK.
So it's pollution, clearly.
Yeah, that is a whole other conversation with a whole other panel, which
Yeah.
we should also be having up to Delhi, Ranjani.
Maybe this is a good point to stop the recording.